Hi everybody, I'm Drake. Some of you know me. I'm some current and former students in the room, and for those of you who don't know me, I'm a PhD student I'm a PhD candidate in music theory here at IU, here at Jacobs. I am in my 4th year of study here, and so I got here in 2022 when the MGS was forming, and I'm proud to say that I'm not proud to say, but I'm happy to say that this is my first ever MGS meeting, finally. I've been involved with video game music since high school. I did a lot of transcribing when I was in high school. I wound up writing a lot of mock compositions in the styles of other games. Then I went to college for math, and after my first year, I didn't get the grade I needed in multivariable calculus to declare the major. And I got a job working for a video game company as their lead composer. So I did that work for a year. It was a virtual reality, augmented reality startup called Beyond One Industries. And I wrote music for a bunch of little science and math augmented reality games that they made for the education system. And I made music for 2 bigger games that they created. And that was my job all of sophomore year of college. Company folded, as startups do, and so then, but at that point I'd already declared the music major, I was composing more, and I really wanted to get into video game composition. After that, I realized that getting a job as a composer is the worst thing in the world, so I decided, okay, I have these great researchers, including Roger Mosley, who wrote a book called Keys to Play. He's the guy who coined the term ludomusicology, the study of video game music. And so I did an independent study with him, realized I love research, and then did an undergraduate thesis that was a bit composition, a bit research, and took 2 years off after. I also took a class with Elizabeth Medina Gray, who will be here in the spring, and we should get MGS theory people to talk about that, because you should all go to that talk. But she's at Ithaca College, she's also published a lot on video game music, and she was another mentor of mine. With all of that, applied here for my PhD in 2022, got in, and have been studying a bunch of different stuff, including some of the research that I'm going to be sharing with you today. So I do music theory in video games, and it's a very, very fast-growing field of music research. So I appreciate you taking your time. A couple of that was the official preamble, but a couple of notes about this presentation before I get started. This was a presentation that I've made for music theory spaces, so there might be moments where I stop and explain something in a little bit more depth, or moments where I'm like, this is what a JRPG is, because I'm explaining it to a room of academic musicians rather than a group of folks who know about video games. The other thing is, and I'll plug this later, but if you are all interested in the research of this sort of music, I assume that most of you are either performers or composers here at Jacobs, or if you're not in Jacobs, that's still fine, you can still research this stuff. But if you're at all interested in the academic side of things and really want to be in these academic spaces, I can give you a lot of resources in terms of books to read, or conferences that you might be able to attend if you want, or if you can get club funding to go to a conference or something like that. I'm happy to kind of lead you in that direction. So without further ado, this is my presentation. There we go. Battle against the machine, computational analysis of Motif and meter in EarthBound. So EarthBound is the second entry of 3 in the Mother series of video games. It was released in the United States in 1995 for the Super Nintendo Entertainment System. In this talk, I perform an analysis on an accurate fan-cam transcription of the game's soundtrack, which I think we saw actually in the MGS Discord. And I employ programs that I developed with the Python toolkit Music 21. Using these programs, I isolate plot-related musical motifs within the soundtrack and categorize its tracks with respect to their unconventional metric behavior. I then situate these findings within the context of the game's narrative and experiential conventions of early game audio. Finally, I reflect on my findings and approach and discuss the value of fan materials, especially transcriptions, as corpora for analysis. So first, let's discuss EarthBound within the context of the Mother series, the JRPG genre, and existing research. EarthBound is a Japanese role-playing game, or JRPG, a genre in which the player conventionally controls a party of characters that embark on a grand adventure, defeating enemies and leveling up as they progress. A stereotypical early JRPG sees the player control a party of heroes in a high fantasy setting, vaguely inspired by medieval Europe. These games owed much of their success to their similarity in terms of gameplay, setting, plot, and visual and musical aesthetics. EarthBound and its 1989 predecessor, Mother, subverted these norms. In EarthBound, you play not as a knight or a wizard, but as a group of children with psychic powers led by the protagonist Ness. Instead of swords and magic, they wield baseball bats, yo-yos, and frying pans. And instead of a high fantasy world, the game is set in Eagle Land, a parody of 20th century suburban United States. Its music, like its setting and plot, subverts genre norms. Tim Summers notes how most early JRPGs, quote, emulate a 19th century orchestral idiom or invoke Baroque chorales and keyboard music. EarthBound soundtrack subverts these norms as well. A significant portion of its soundtrack is inspired by American popular music, including rock, jazz, ragtime, and blues music. The game's soundtrack includes interpolations of songs such as Tequila by the Champs and Chuck Berry's Johnny B. Good, and short samples of music by artists such as the Beatles, Beach Boys, and John Philip Sousa. In his master's thesis, a scholar named Justin Sextro noticed how the game's eclectic mix of genres serves to reduce player immersion in a way, reminding them that they're playing a game. I'll discuss how the game's use of metric irregularity achieves a similar effect. So, music is also an important component of the Mother series' thematic and narrative identities. All three games in the series employ music as a major plot device. In the first two games, Mother and EarthBound, a key component of story progression is the collection of 8 melodic fragments called the 8 Melodies, which are used to defeat the alien horror final boss, Gygus. Tim Summers ties this musical strategy, as it's employed in the first game, Mother, to an aesthetic of naivete, and considers the game a testament towards the emotional power of music. I'll expand upon Summers' ideas, demonstrating how thematic and motivic connections between Mother and EarthBound solidify that claim. So this study was performed on a corpus consisting of a fan transcription by composer Eli Mekele of the 126 tracks which constitute EarthBound's soundtrack, and I analyzed them using the Python-based toolkit Music21. I batch converted each of these tracks, which Eli posted on Tumblr in the Sibelius file format, into the Music XML format, which is compatible for use for Music21. In making her transcription, Mekele utilized third-party modding tools, actually the ones that Toby Fox used when he was doing the EarthBound mods. She used third-party modding tools which allowed her to access the game's musical data directly and ensuring musical accuracy. Despite this, I acknowledge that she made editorial decisions while transcribing the music, particularly concerning the irregular metric behavior on the soundtrack. It can't be known whether the composers thought of these metric irregularities in the way that Eli wrote them, but Eli's score, which aims toward performability, reflects both the actual musical content of the soundtrack and her hearing of the music. The tracks found in this corpus are varied in their gameplay function, length, prevalence, instrumentation, and structure. For example, this soundtrack includes music played during cutscenes before gameplay, looped music that plays in certain areas or during combat, this is the one that interpolates Tequila, that's the background chord for Tequila by the Champs. Short stingers, which comment on a player's victory or level progression. And the utterly horrifying music associated with the game's final boss, Gygus. This variety poses some challenges to the prospect of holistic soundtrack analysis. While some scholarship forgoes this issue, choosing to focus on a few representative tracks within a soundtrack, my analytical approach was developed to be flexible and comprehensive, discussing the whole soundtrack. So, on screen are the score and output window for my interval searching function, corpus interval search. the function takes as an input a melodic motif defined by the user, me, in terms of directed intervals. So major third, minor third, descending minor, so this would be ascending major third, ascending minor third, descending minor second, ascending minor second. That is ba-da-da-da-dum. And it outputs a score in MuseScore with every instance of that motif labeled with the track in which the instance of the motif was found, and measure labels that indicate the instrument and measure location of that said instance. This function treats repeated instances of the same pitch as a single note. As you can see under, let's see, sounds down, we have ya-da-da-da-da-da-dum. So that's considered equivalent to ya-da-da-da-dum. And additionally, the system described is limited that it can only reveal direct melodic statements of the motif. It can't account for like deeper embeddings or transformations. So if I invert the motif, it can't find it. I would have to explicitly ask for that. I employ several smaller functions to investigate changing time signatures in the EarthBound soundtrack. The simplest one is TS change pieces, which determines whether each track has multiple distinct time signature objects. Because irrational and additive time signatures aren't correctly represented in Sibelius by default, the transcriber employs a workaround to display additive and irrational time signatures visually, while the software interprets different hidden time signatures. Because of this, I had to manually edit the output of this function to fix that improper representation, and using that edited output, I employed 4 further functions to categorize the types of time signatures over here. The first one is TS polymeter pieces, which lists the tracks that contain distinct time signature objects at the same time in different parts. So we have 3/4 going on at the same time as 4/4. And we'll see examples of each of these later. TS irrational pieces returns a list of the tracks which contain irrational or non-dyadic time signatures. If any of you are taking Aural Skills 4 right now, you're probably going to get to this at some point. They serve as a shorthand for single measure metric modulations employed by the composer Thomas Addis. So the irrational time signature 10/12 represents a measure duration of 10 8-note triplets. It's weird. TS additive pieces returns a list of the tracks which contain a plus sign in their time signature representation. So this could be something like 12 plus 1 over 8, or 4 plus 4, or 4/4 plus 1/16. So some of these are like compound meters, and some of these are like, if you've ever played any Messiaen, his technique of additive rhythm can be described that way as well. And then finally, in EarthBound, I found that the time signature often changes for only one measure, so the final function I employ identifies tracks that do this. Let's look at the actual results. Using my motif searching function, I generated search outputs for 24 distinct motifs, ranging from 4 to 8 notes. Many of these searches didn't suggest anything analytically salient, but 2 groups of motifs provoked my further analysis. The first group consists of the 8 melodic fragments collected by the player in EarthBound's predecessor, Mother, shown in Figure 2. These are pivotal in defeating the evil alien final boss, Gygus, in both games. Because this plot element is common between the 2 games, I wish to investigate whether there's connections from Mother's 8 melodies to EarthBound's 8 melodies, which are 2 different melodies, weirdly enough. Table 1 shows the number of occurrences of each of these 8 motifs in EarthBound. 4 of these fragments don't appear at all in EarthBound soundtrack. Fragments 4 and 5 appear seemingly only incidentally. Statements of these fragments appear a few times, and in disparate tracks and contexts, in non-melodic instruments, and only once per track in which they appear. Like, something like number 5, or sorry, something like 5, ba-da-da-dum, could just be kind of within another melody, and that seems to be the case for all of them. Fragment 8 is pretty interesting. Bum, ba-da-dum. It appears in several different tracks. In 3 of them, only once in the middle of the track and isn't really emphasized. And in Gygus' intro, the 2 instances of the motif that are not audible to the listener, they appear in a tape part which produces breathing noises, so it's not really that relevant. But the 8 instances of Fragment 8 in the tracks The Power and You Gained a Level appear in the context of repeating ostinato figures. This seems to serve as a reference to the level up track from the original Mother, but its connection to the game's 8 melodies is tenuous. Whereas the fragment in Mother's 8 melodies outlines scale degrees 1, 5, 2, 1 in the original game, the 2 EarthBound tracks it appears in, in the 2 EarthBound tracks it appears, within an arpeggiation of the suspended tonic triad. So the scale degrees 1, 5, 4, 1, 5, 4, and so on, right? Da, ba, da, da, da. Given that Fragment 8 consists of only 3 intervals, it's not really surprising that its many appearances in the soundtrack are seemingly incidental. Conversely, appearances of Fragment 1 warrant a deeper investigation. Of its 15 appearances in the soundtrack, the 4 found in A Flash of Memory are particularly unique. The instances of Fragment 1 in A Flash of Memory are rendered in the same rhythm as in Mother's 8 melodies. Let's listen to that track following its 4-measure fade-in. A Flash of Memory seems to be an explicit reference to the 8 melodies from Mother. Considering its placement in the game's story, the impetus for this reference becomes clear. A Flash of Memory is played each time the player collects one of the 8 melodic fragments in EarthBound, at which point Ness recalls a memory from his early youth or infancy. This musical reference to Mother's 8 melodies is a literal flash of memory that ties the narratives of the 2 games together. How do the other appearances of Fragment 1 relate to this then? Aside from the 8th note pickup in EarthBound's version, the opening intervallic gestures of the 2 games' 8 melodies themes are identical, as shown in Figure 3. Ya-da-da-da-dum, and ba-da-da-da-da-da-da-dum, so on. Each of the other instances of Fragment 1 in the soundtrack are quotations of EarthBound's version of the 8 melodies, and have narrative ties to their collection. Soundstone serves as an in-game reminder of the fragments of the 8 melodies the players collected thus far. Entering Magicant and Ness Awakens from the Nightmare are associated with Ness's arrival to and departure from Magicant, a dreamlike world accessible once the player has collected all of the 8 melodies, and right before the party travels back in time to fight an infantile Gygas. This game is fun. Finally, the track Smiles and Tears appears in the game's ending credits. It's a sentimental recomposition of EarthBound's 8 melodies. In a chapter for nostalgia and video game music, Justin Sextro highlights some narrative similarities between Mother and EarthBound. I further argue that the musical reference to Mother within and around appearances of EarthBound's 8 melodies, as well as parallels between Gygas's developing infant form and Ness's recollection of his own infancy, create a subtextual musico-narrative thread that further ties the 2 games together during some of EarthBound's most pivotal scenes. Several tracks in EarthBound's soundtrack also feature a strange siren-like portamento figure, the first few notes of which are shown on screen in Figure 4. This figure, which I've dubbed the alien motif, appears in 7 tracks in EarthBound, shown on Table 2. Let's hear a couple examples of this motif. First, in Belch's factory. This is Dangerous Caves, where we hear it with an echo effect. And this is Battle Against a Weak Opponent. This is the one that sounds like Tequila by the Champs. Oh, sorry. This is Otherworldly Foe, where we hear a chordal variation. Sorry about that. And then it just goes into the grooviest beat you've ever heard. And this is Battle Against a Weak Opponent. Weirdly, we hear it in a couple different timbres. A variation of this motif, which I've dubbed the Belch motif, replaces the 4th interval of the alien motif with an augmented 4th. It appears in the boss theme of Master Belch, one of Gygas's henchmen. I interpret this pair of motifs as musical signifiers of Gygas's influence on the world and its creatures. 3 of the tracks listed are battle themes that play during encounters with creatures who are either directly related to Gygas or have gained some power through his influence, and 3 further tracks play in areas associated with Master Belch. The remaining track, Somebody's Knocking at the Door, is one of the strangest tracks on an already strange soundtrack. It plays at the beginning of the game as Ness's neighbor, Pokey Minch, erratically raps on the door to Ness's home, launching the game's plot. Let's listen to that track. All right. Pokey becomes a secondary antagonist, a servant of Gygas and the game's penultimate boss battle. Thus, it's possible to read the presence of the alien motif in that track, Somebody's Knocking at the Door, as an early hint that Pokey has maybe been corrupted by Gygas' influence. On to time signatures, because this is also very fun and very weird. 42 of the 128 tracks in EarthBound feature multiple time signatures. Of these 42 tracks, 4 contain what I'm calling polymeter. And I did have examples of these, but we'll get there. 9 contain irrational time signatures, like this 712 here. And 8 contain additive time signatures, like this 12-8 plus 1/8. 34 of the 42 tracks on the soundtrack that contain a time signature change, 34 of those tracks contain a time signature change that lasts for only one measure. So let's look at some of these examples. Titles and descriptions of the tracks which employ simultaneous distinct time signatures are shown in Table 3. These tracks are disparate in function and tone and in narrative context. So the metric effect of each instance of the polymeter is kind of unique, so no structural or narrative connections can really be made between these tracks, although it is cool that it's happened multiple times. Notably, that Boris cocktail track is very, very weird, like really, really strange. I can talk about that later more. The tracks containing additive time signatures are shown in Table 4. 4 of these tracks employ a 1/32nd note addition to the conventional time signature. 3 of those are explicitly narratively linked to the previously mentioned antagonist Pokey Minch. These are the tracks Pokey, Pokey's House, and Happy Happy is Blue. Since the added value is so short, it feels a little bit more like a record skip than a significant amount of musical time. So let's listen to this in Pokey. A portion of the score is going to be shown on screen. Listen for the triangle wave, which sounds like a bass drum. We're going to hear a skip and then the 3/8. And it just sounds like that. The meter change in Happy Happy is Blue is a little more subtle. In it, a measure of additive meter, 3/8 plus 1/32, occurs during a phrase-ending portamento figure before returning to common time. This subtler implementation of the added 30-second note may echo the fact that when the player first encounters Happy Happy Village, this game is cool, they are not yet aware of Pokey's involvement as a member of leadership in the town's insidious cult. The other track, which includes an added 30-second note, is You've Come Far, Ness. This track plays during a trippy cutscene with scrolling text that reflects on the player's journey thus far. The text explicitly references Pokey, referring to him as, quote, the worst person in the neighborhood. This reference perhaps explains the track's use of an added 30-second note. The 4 other pieces which are notated with additive time signatures don't exhibit the similar metric structures to the other tracks discussed, and so are probably not exactly related to this concept. They're disparate in function and tone. Irrational time signatures, outlined here in Table 5, often serve as a form of metric disruption, as heard here in the opening credits. Four of these tracks, which contain irrational time signatures, are specifically used for combat and boss battles, and 3 of them are played in areas which are explicitly hostile or unwelcoming to the party. The opening credits invokes a few different themes from across the game as a montage-style cutscene plays, presenting the game's central conflict. And as discussed prior, You've Come Far, Ness plays during a motivational cutscene which congratulates the player on the progress and warns them of the challenges ahead. As such, I interpret the use of irrational time signatures as an oral reminder of danger and hostility in the game's world that the playable characters must confront. And finally, single measure time signature changes. 34 tracks in the EarthBound soundtrack were found which possess a single measure time signature change, shown in this table. These invariably take place at formal boundaries, so between subphrases, as with that opening credits example that we just saw. At the end of each phrase, as in Caverns of Winters, where we have an extra 1/8 for an extra 8th note added to the end of each phrase. After an introduction, like in Sanctuary Guardian, so we have this weird introduction, 1/32nd note, and then it plays the regular track. And many of these tracks, including Pokey, which we saw earlier, engage with video game looping practices. These time signature changes tend to occur at or before the points of repetition of the track's macro, meso, or micro loops per Karen Collins. So the idea is that we're about to loop the track and they add an extra time signature right in before the track loops. EarthBound's high frequency of single measure meter changes, which are rare if not unseen in other RPGs of the time, suggests that the disruption of meter was an intentional transgressive aesthetic principle espoused by the game's composers. This compositional choice disrupts the musical smoothness expected from a game's musical experience. The intentional disruption of meter at significant formal moments has the potential to break player immersion, reminding them that they are, in fact, playing a game. EarthBound contains several humorous moments that break the fourth wall, suggesting that this disruption was a guiding aesthetic principle for the entire game, rather than just its music. So, in this talk, I demonstrated how musical motifs in EarthBound create a narrative thread between the game and its predecessor Mother, and communicate the influence of the game's primary antagonist Gygus on many of the game's secondary antagonistic forces. I also showed how the game's composers use a rational meter to convey hostile locations and enemies, how they associate the added 30-second note with the antagonist Pokeminch, and how they employ single-measure time signature changes to subvert formal expectations of early video game music and reduce player immersion in tandem with the game's other subversive aesthetic goals. I think that this scholarship demonstrates the value in the use of fan materials, particularly transcriptions, in academic music research. Fans put in countless hours of work, as I'm sure many of you have, to make occasionally high-quality musical transcriptions of game audio. And many of these sources are at risk of disappearing, as did the corpus. It's hard to find the corpus that I found in the talk, that I've discussed in the talk, because her Tumblr profile name has changed so many times. So, a lot of these are, housed on forum websites or, individual repositories that one person's keeping alive. So it's kind of an interesting archival question of how do we keep these transcriptions online. Moreover, I hope to have demonstrated the value of these computational methods using Python when approaching the unique corpora authored by an early video game soundtrack. So if I develop this further, I could study improvement, or I could improve my analytical tools by developing my motif searcher further to accommodate the search of various techniques like portamento or transformations of motifs. And perhaps there are deep motivic or metric connections uncovered, or to be uncovered, between EarthBound and its sequel, Mother 3. The soundtrack of EarthBound is intricate, eclectic, and unorthodox. It conveys wide-ranging experiences from childhood memories and energetic combat to cosmic horror, and it does so while accompanying a story which echoes the stories that we often encounter in our own lives. Stories of fear, courage, friendship, and the power of love and song. The music which accompanies this game is undoubtedly special, as many of its fans know, and this study is but a first step towards understanding exactly why it has enthralled, confused, and touched the so many who have played this strange, strange game. Thank you. Thanks for listening to that. If you have any questions about this or why I did it or how other things that I'm planning to do with it, you can feel free to ask. And yeah, I'd love to hear what your thoughts are. I welcome comments just as much as questions. Hello, and I'd love to hear your names because I don't know any of you.
I'm Mahima. I love EarthBound soundtrack and I love what you've done here. I'm someone who's learning Python right now, so I'm also kind of interested in the kind of the library and the functions that you're using. Mm-hmm. So in terms of your further study, I'm curious in how you seek to perhaps, analyze the changing on melody, like retrograde or inversion, and how you kind of plan to use Python to your advantage in that.
Yeah, thank you for the question. So the first thing I should shout out is I'll actually just pull it up here because it's worth it to do. There is a Python library called Music21, and it is just kind of like a project that these guys at MIT did once, and it allows you to directly interface with music XML formats that you would be able to export out of Finale and Sibelius, and you can use them to ask analytical questions of game music. And for what it's worth, the motif searcher that I built probably wouldn't be that hard to do something like retrograde. I would just have to essentially change each of the intervals so that anyone that didn't have a minus in it had a minus in it, and vice versa. Inversion would be a little bit harder. Actually, it probably wouldn't be that much harder because again, I just have to. Oh wait, sorry, that would be inversion. Retrograde would just be I switch them around and do the minus, and then retrograde inversion, same deal. So it wouldn't be that hard to implement that. I just hadn't at the point of this project, and I wasn't. I wanted to make sure that I was dealing with only direct melodic motifs, right. But in terms of looking at those functions, it wouldn't be too hard to fix. Other things like portamento and glissandi and stuff are a little bit harder to deal with because markup language formats are very inconsistent, and even programs like Sibelius, Finale, or Dorico will export things a little bit differently onto that. So a bit trickier to work with there. But there's some really great examples on here where they'll show about like if I want to analyze a bunch of Bach chorales, things that are already we want to search all of Bach's pieces that don't have a Picardy third at the end, all of the minor key pieces that don't have a Picardy third at the end, and they are able to do that and get the full list literally by the end of this, and it's not too bad. Like if you're familiar with Python, it's actually not that bad. Pieces like this or work like this is much easier when you have something that's already encoded like all of Bach's works, and there's a bunch of different corpuses that are up here on the Music 21 website that people can use. Video game music, I feel like, is a pretty apt realm for that, because there's a lot of early game audio that is not that far away from just, if you have NES files, you can take that, turn it into an XML format, and then just use it. So there's other folks out there who are doing transcription work that might be useful for this type of work, but I think early game audio especially is very, very ripe for the exploration here. So if you want to do any project on this, feel free to email me and ask questions. Yeah. Luke?
You talked a little bit, a tiny bit about like the instrumentation at the start, and I mean I think it's really interesting, like with music as early as this in video games, that you couldn't have actual instruments and record it, and it's all like sine waves and things like that. Did you look into like where these motifs are placed in the instrumentation and everything?
Oh, that's a good question. I didn't find specific patterns as to which instruments were reliably used for certain motifs, but I also wasn't looking for them. Just based off of my kind of cursory understanding of the EarthBound soundtrack, I know that they often will use kind of for a lot of the tracks, they'll use kind of like a big band or blues band style situation where a lot of the main motifs are in trumpet, because with SNES FM synthesis, trumpet, organ sounds, trumpet, organ, and electric guitar are the sounds that sound best for melody instruments. My assumption as to if I look for that is that we would find out that, hey, it's the instruments that are most often used on the SNES generally, or that on this soundtrack generally. But that is an interesting question. Off the top of my head, I don't think there's a connection with like certain motifs are always in the trumpet or always in the bass, but it would definitely be something interesting to look for. Yeah, something I didn't consider.
Sorry, another question.
Yeah.
I'm very interested in the transcription of like a lot of the very unorthodox or like particularly like the alien motif. I was very interested on how like that could possibly even be notated in some shape or form.
Right. So this is the transcription that I used, and I can find one example. I think there's one right here early.
Just went past them just now.
Oh yeah. This is Pokey. Good buddy. Oh, here we go. Otherworldly Flow. So essentially, this one's wild because they do this chordal arpeggio on the organ, or chordal glissando on the organ. But the notation serves to reflect what is encoded in the game's data. So it's not just like I heard it out and transcribed it. It's that these are the actual notes that the machine is trying to play, and then they put a portamento effect between them. Mm-hmm. So in the actual tracking on the SNES, it is C down to C, up to F, up to A flat. Whether that's actually distinctly audible is less, less clear, but when this motif comes back, it is always that opening gesture, and it is remarkably consistent. So it seems like it was being used with intention by the composers.
And I know like EarthBound uses a lot of samples in its soundtrack, which is like I think a very unique feature of it, like, and especially they took stuff from like the Beatles and Monty Python, which is like very significant. And I wonder, like, especially I'm thinking of one track in particular, how this particular transcription doesn't Megaton walk with
Yeah, let's
the
find it.
Beatles sample.
Yeah. I know which one you're talking about. Where is Megaton Walk? Yeah, 143. So the way this is usually worked, again, it's going to be reflecting the actual like encoded data in the game. So the way that those samples work, it's I think it's called like DMCP or something like that, like DCMP sampling. Yeah.
I think.
And the way that works is that they would load an audio clip into RAM at the beginning, and then they would play that audio clip at different pitch levels depending on what they want. And so in Megaton Walk, you can see this is the drumming from Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band, and you can see what they actually did was they went and transcribed the actual. Well, actually, let's listen to Megaton Walk real quick.
Yeah.
We got time. So. So in this case, the transcriber did actually go through and transcribe this, but if we look at an example like in
Place.
the one that I'm looking for, so I actually have an example from one of the Gygas tracks where, so these tape lines are essentially like breathing that isn't really audible besides just the fact that it's breathing, and so these E naturals are really just saying, hey, play it at this time, and then if you go into the appendix here, you'll notice that they actually notated out some of the tapes because they just consisted of noise or because it was too big to include on the score. So then they go through, and this is the Liberty Bell March by John Philip Sousa. This is Sgt. Pepper Lonely Hearts Club Band stuff. So all that from Megaton Walk. So actually, what you see in there is the notation of the inputs in the game's data, and then this is their notation of what that was actually sampling. So yeah, there's Beach Boys in there. It's really interesting to look at. These breathing sounds, electric guitar, stuff like that. So that's how they dealt with this. And so what that does mean is if there's information in this that I need to access, I can't, because it's not in the actual transcription. Hi, what's your name?
Jonathan.
Hi, John.
I'm curious about, you're talking about how like the person who transcribed it, Ellie? I don't remember.
Yeah, Ellie.
Used like the actual files from the game.
Mm-hmm.
When I've done SNES transcriptions in the past for like personal projects and stuff, it's just been like by ear,
Yep.
kind of painstakingly.
Yeah.
Do you know what like keywords I could use to Google what kind of process?
So, yeah, here's the tricky thing. EarthBound has a very active modding scene. And so, I mean, and like I said, Toby Fox, when he was doing the Halloween hacks for Mother Day, that was him doing that. And I'm pretty sure the reason that modding scene is able to access the direct music data is because they've done a full decompilation of the game. So EarthBound's fans have been able to get into the file data for a while now, but it is not something I don't think that is fully implemented across all NES library. So my unfortunate answer is that depending on the game, most likely it doesn't exist, that tool. But it also means it can, and I think that there's a very pretty active contingent of early video game lovers online who are interested in decompilation projects like this, who are putting in a lot of work to create modding tools for these games. And the worst case scenario, it's good for your oral skills, man. You can getting better at transcribing is a skill that will help you throughout your musical life. So but the other thing that I can say is that there is a guy named Greg Rossetti who he does. Let's see if I can get. This guy. He has a YouTube channel that has a lot of early game transcriptions and some later games, but let's see here. I guess he doesn't have them organized very well, but and this isn't actually even it now that I'm thinking about it. but BGM transcriptions, I think it might be a separate, yeah, it's this guy. It's same guy, but he has a lot of transcriptions of older video game music that some of it uses just his ear, some of it uses game data, and it varies. I'm pretty sure every NES game has musical game data that you can download and find if you know the right people. I will caution that there is a legal gray area around a lot of this stuff that, for the sake of academic research, is usually glossed over. But if you're ever planning on like publishing a transcription yourself, just be very careful that you're not, making the big N mad.
Okay.
Yeah.
I do. Sorry.
You're good.
I'm just really interested.
Yeah, of course.
I do wonder, with your experience in kind of ludomusicology, have you ever come in contact with some of the legal aspects of it? Because I think we all know that video game companies can
Yes.
be kind of stingy about their games and what you do with them.
So luckily, most academic presentations and contexts are covered under fair use. But one thing that I have run into, or at least I'm starting to look at, I have some research that I'm trying to get published, and I am writing a dissertation right now. And in both cases, you have to be very careful about permissions. So a journal that I'm submitting to is the Journal of Sound and Music in Games, which is led by the Society of Sound and Society for the Study of Sound and Music in Games. Free to join society. You can just join for free and get their newsletter and everything, and you should do that. And there's a great bibliography that they keep for research on anything. So if you want to, search through this and be like, I want to find, anyone that's ever written about civilization, you can go here and type in civilization, and here's all of these different articles and chapters and everything that reference civilization. But the Journal of Sound, Music, and Games, I recently attended a workshop for submitters for this, and the lead editor, Dana, told me that they do sometimes run into issues with articles, and that there's occasionally situations where either they can't get permissions, or the permissions are held by someone that doesn't, like no one can give the permissions, especially for older games. But a lot of the times it just comes down to, if you are making your own examples, if you're ever doing research, it's always best to do your own screenshots, your own game recordings, your own rips of things, because then you're not also dealing with, okay, I not only have to get the game company's permission, but I also have to get, Captain Falcon 922 on YouTube's permission. That's just going to be a lot harder. And for what it's worth, even in cases of fair use, I always recommend reaching out to people. Ellie Makala, the composer who did this, I tracked her down. Because again, her Tumblr was the source of all of this, and so I was like, okay, well, who are you? And then I found her YouTube channel, and from that I was able to, message her. I found an email from something, and I emailed her, and I was like, hey, I'm doing this project. It uses your work. Here it is. It's interesting, I hope. And she was very happy to hear about it, and generally that has been the case. I've been in contact with a couple of developers for Beat Saber and Dance of Fire and Ice, a couple of rhythm games that I study, and they've all been really happy to hear that their work has been discussed. And generally that's what it is. Even if Nintendo or whatever company is like, no, don't do this sort of stuff, usually the actual people are like, yeah, we want you to talk about our music, of course, that's super cool. And I'm sure you've run into plenty of issues from the MGS side of things with that Notice concert and all that. Permissions are a scary, awful thing, but luckily we have a good team of legal professionals here at IU who are very adept at exactly what they need to do for this sort of stuff. That is tentatively what I got. Thanks for being here and listening to this.